Hi, and welcome to Mind That Childminder, a podcast that's meant for well-us childminders. Today, we're going to be talking about all things outdoorsy, why it's important for children to be outdoors, how much time they should be spending outdoors, how it links to those all-important frameworks, as well as thinking about, as we always do, getting it right back into how it relates to childminding, our challenges and our pros and all the rest of it. So go and grab that cuppa and let's get stuck into chatting. As ever, I did a little delve into the frameworks that I could find with my highlighter out on everything mentioning outdoors. From what I could find, all of the Great British frameworks talked about outdoor play and how it was a requirement to access the outdoors every day. The Irish framework just mentioned regular access, and I couldn't find anything to kind of distinguish what regular means. But I think we could all agree from that best practice suggests that daily outdoor activities and opportunities are important for young children, and that's what we're aiming for. Now, it doesn't matter if you don't have a garden or a specific designated outdoor space, as long as you're going outdoors into your local area every day, you're likely to be meeting the requirement. I quite often on this podcast talk about our kind of cave people days and our kind of evolution, and this episode is no different. We as a species evolved to be outside. Of course, we needed shelter, hence cave people, but for the most part of our daylight hours and our survival, it came from outdoors. Our food was outdoors, our resources were outdoors, and I thought it would be helpful to look at a piece of research relating to this. So I found Baker N looked at human relationships to the natural world and how it impacts building design. And they did this piece of research in the year 2000. And they commented on how our ancestors would have spent most of their daylight hours outside. And we have a drive now still in our modern day life to bring the outdoors in. And we can find that by having things like plants and natural materials and paintings and all these things that remind us of the great outdoors. We like to bring them in. And it's been proven, and backed up by this study, that there are all sorts of things that are impacted by this kind of historical being outside, such as the temperatures that we like to, and how we regulate our body temperature and our sleep habits, that circadian rhythm that we've talked about in a previous episode about sleep and how daylight and artificial light can affect our sleep because of how we evolved. But also having some of these natural elements inside our environments benefits us, such as reduction of headaches and fatigue when we have plants and things inside our workplaces. So therefore, being outdoors is actually kind of a part of who we are as a species and how we have continued to survive, in this world. So it's really, really important. And that's why we're going to talk about it today. Everywhere you look at the moment, well, even just for the last few years, there are articles and research papers that talk about the benefits of being outside, both children and adults, everyone. And the main recent observation is that children are spending less time outdoors and that there's an increase in additional needs and developmental delays. And there's a big question over whether these are linked. It's also probably quite easy for most people to make a link that being outdoors supports physical skills and well-being. However, it would be foolish to just presume all of this. And I did a bit of research, and it seems that opinions are very different across time as well as culture. So looking at some past research from kind of the 90s and early 2000s, there's a lot of links between physical activity, the decline in such activity, and children becoming obese. And this is still happening in China, where, for example, a recent study, 2024, by Zong et al., they researched in China that an increase in screen time has led to a decrease in outdoor playtime, and that this is a critical factor in young children developing obesity in later childhood. However, if you look at other research, especially from the UK, it's starting to be seen that this isn't necessarily the kind of most up-to-date opinion. And for the episode, when I talk about outdoor play and kind of the benefits of this, I'm going to be trying to talk a lot more about fitness rather than body shape, because we as a culture are kind of changing from this view that obesity is bad and trying to get rid of fat shaming and things. And actually we're talking about fitness, enjoyment of being outside, and overall well-being. So I just want to be really clear that in this episode that I don't necessarily support the view that a lack of outdoor time results in obesity, which is a negative thing. I'm not a scientist or a researcher, and I do not have the qualifications to say whether that's true or not. And I would rather focus on children being fit and healthy and having kind of good aspirations and kind of routines set into their life for their fitness and their overall health. So just to put that out there and to clarify things that I might talk about later in this episode. I would like to think of other reasons why being outdoors might be good for children. Things like sensory exploration, social development, health and well-being, cognitive development. Do all of these things get influenced by being outdoors with young children? I think that all development areas can be seen and supported in the outdoors environment, but maybe as childminders, we don't want to face the weather, or we have a really busy routine where we count on going on the school run and that being the outdoor environment for the day or the outdoor opportunity for the day. And we just generally don't feel very clued up about that outdoors. There are lots of childminders who are fabulous at providing outdoors environments, and that could really potentially be one of you. But I'm sure there are also a lot of childminders who aren't so confident about being outdoors. And I'm hoping this episode will be a little bit of a happy balance about working out, kind of being even more positive about the outdoors. And this is because Kemp N and Joseph Edu in 2021 conducted research on the use of outdoor settings in early years provisions across several countries. And it found that even in countries where we see it as an outdoorsy place, an outdoorsy culture, you might think of kind of Nordic cultures, for example, Sweden, Scandinavia, these countries that we take kind of forest schooling approaches from. Even in those cultures and countries, practitioners still found it challenging to provide an outdoor opportunity, especially to babies, and to also be engaged as active participants rather than someone who just stands there watching for safety. So maybe some self-reflection on our own relationship to the outdoors and some guidance about how to tackle those barriers are needed, because even in countries where practitioners are kind of raised to be far more outdoorsy than we are in the UK, if they're finding it challenging, then it's perfectly acceptable for us to admit that we're finding it challenging and to seek help and to find ways to support our young children in using this really important environment. We've talked before about different approaches to the curriculum. And when I say the curriculum, I mean approaches that influence the curriculums we provide, because there isn't one set curriculum. An approach that really values nature and outdoors is the Froebel approach. And so I headed over to the Froebel Trust website, and they promote the Froebelian principles that were founded by Frederick Froebel himself, who was a childhood theorist in the 1850s. They believe that everything is connected and that nature plays a huge part in children's lives. They believe that you should have a kind of a garden set up, and a Froebelian garden, you could expect to see things that are really hands-on, challenging, that have uneven ground, patches for children to grow things, risky play, but there's also an expectation on the practitioner to be a careful observer and to provide meaningful interactions with the children. This is someone who helps children to develop confidence and knowledge, and helps children to reflect on their environment and their experiences in the ever-changing world, and to help also create an environment that is changing and meeting the interests and development of the children. So it's not enough in a Froebelian approach to just be outside and watch children. Rather, adults need to be knowledgeable about environment themselves, and they need to be enthused about the natural world, and that in turn nurtures children's creativities. So that is something that I think a lot of us can relate to, that we want children to grow things, we want children to be kind of having their hands in the dirt. Risky play is really kind of popular. And if you're not very aware of risky play, maybe that's something we can talk about in future. But quite often we might talk about a risk benefit analysis when we do risk assessments, so that yes, things might be a little bit risky, but do the benefits outweigh the possibility of something going a little bit wrong? We obviously don't want children to be in a dangerous environment, so there is a balance, but it's really interesting to see that the Froebelian approach and the theories there have kind of trickled down, even if you're not a Froebelian setting. Saying all of this, when you're imagining that Froebelian garden, I personally imagined toddlers upwards, digging and running and climbing. But what about babies? Lots of childminders care for a huge age of ages, including under ones. So why does it seem to be unnatural to think about this age group outdoors, and why does it feel hard to support that age group outdoors? And I kind of looked into this a bit, because every bit of research I was reading was about children, preschoolers, and it was really hard to work out where the babies were in this research. And I came across this research that was called that, Where Are the Babies? And it was by Kemp and Joseph Vidu in 2020. So that was a key point in our kind of understanding about being outdoors, because at that point we were all locked indoors in the UK. We were locked indoors because of COVID, and I think that was a point where loads of us realised that we had taken the outdoors for granted, that we were restricted to being outside kind of once a day for just exercise, and it was a really bizarre time. I'm sure that you don't all need a super reminding of it, but in that report that was in 2020, I agree with the researchers that there's a lack of research of babies in outdoor environments, because I just couldn't find anything. This was the only piece I could find. And I think that this is going to have a huge impact on the societal expectations of babies being outdoors. And it also gives limited practice, kind of a practice and practical advice for people working with those youngest children. If there's no research on them, then it's not going to pass down into policy and practice. If nobody is talking about the benefits of being outdoors, then how are we going to be outdoors with children? Who is teaching people? Who is putting that into the policy if nobody's researching it? So I think that's a really important study, and I'll link it in the show notes so that you can find it yourself, of just how missed babies are in the research relating to outdoors, especially when we think about all of the opportunities and how we evolved to be outdoors. Why are we not taking babies outdoors? And I really hope that in future there will be more research on that, because I think that will be really impactful on telling us practitioners how to do that and what the benefits are, and that we will feel empowered to take the youngest of little humans out there into the big wide world. I have a feeling that this episode is kind of picking at different points like this. It's just going grab at different points. And I think by the end of the episode, hopefully it will just all piece together and will make a whole lot of sense for everyone. So I'm going to keep on with that approach, because I do feel like this is the point of outdoor play, is that it kind of links to here and links to there, and there's links up there and links down there, and we actually need to squeeze them all together. So now I'm going to be talking about how much outdoor time young children should be getting. Now, that was also quite an interesting thing to research, because the NHS website suggests about active play, and that play is not necessarily outdoors. I feel like being outdoors promotes active play more than inside in most cases, but it doesn't actually give any recommendation about how much time should be spent outdoors. Yes, our frameworks tell us daily, but it doesn't, daily could be like step outside and go back inside. And, technically you've met that, but is that the right thing to do? It's kind of up to you, isn't it? Because there is no actual guidance. So I thought I would share from the NHS website the active play recommendations, and then we can go from there. So for non-mobile babies, it's 30 minutes of tummy time a day. That's the kind of that's the minimum recommendation of active play for non-mobile babies. Now that really doesn't sound like very much, does it? And I would hope that in early year settings that babies do get a bit more active play time than that. And it's 3 hours a day of active play for 1 to 2 year olds, and that can include movements such as just standing up. It doesn't have to be all kind of running around and hopping and jumping and screaming and roaring. It can actually be just standing at a table playing rather than just sitting down. And then the recommendation for 2 to 3 year olds is 3 hours a day of active play, 1 hour of which should be vigorous, such as jumping or dancing. But it does appear that there is no formal rule on how much outdoor time children should be getting. Ultimately, every child is different, and the amount of time that they spend outdoors might actually be dependent on how active the children are themselves and how content they are to be outside. Many childminders might not be able to offer a free flow situation like you would maybe find at a nursery or other group setting. And so it's going to be down to the childminder in each individual setting to choose what works best for the children you care for. I think we can all aim, though, for a bit more than we already do now. Well, unless you're a forest school setting, which, that should be quite challenging to fit more outdoors time in if you're a forest school setting. And I think that it's quite easy when the weather is not so great to be a bit over it. But we need to be instilling a not necessarily positive approach, because not everyone does like rain, and not everyone does believe that the saying about there's no such thing as bad weather, it's just bad clothing. Not everyone believes in this, but I feel like if you find it hard, it's okay for the children to see that, and it's okay for children to know that you have to do hard things. And I don't think we have to teach children that rainy days are horrible and we don't want to be outdoors and begrudge it. But I think that it's important that we teach children that we can do hard things. So going off a little bit, but it is on topic, I care for a child currently who really, really, really doesn't like the cold. And they are so affected by the cold. They cry that their hands are cold. They don't want to be out in it, but they are such an outdoorsy child. They love being outdoors. But the second their hands get cold, that's it. It's full on meltdowns. And it doesn't matter how many pairs of gloves they're wearing, how many jumpers. They just are really sensitive to the cold. And there is no point in me dragging that child outdoors into the freezing cold where she's miserable and where they aren't learning anything, because their emotional brain has taken over and they're just saying, I need to be in shelter now. I'm not willing to do this anymore. Their needs are overtaking their want to learn. So I've had to adapt my practice quite a lot for that child, because there is no point in me dragging that child around outdoors saying there's no bad weather, it's just bad clothing, because she is wearing absolutely everything she could possibly be wearing. And we're doing all the running and, it's just she really, really, really doesn't like being cold. And so I've had to adapt my practice that, okay, well, we won't go on long walks on those days. We'll just go on a short walk that day. And she still finds it very hard. But what's been a really useful lesson for her is that I am with her, and I'm coaching her, and I'm being that voice that hopefully one day she'll hear inside herself. But I'm being the voice that's saying, I know this is really hard, but I believe you can do hard things. I know that this is really difficult, but it's not going to last forever. We need to go and do this one little thing in the cold, and then we're going to be back in the warm. This isn't going to last forever. This uncomfortable doesn't last forever. And I think that's okay for her to learn. And if you are someone like that child who gets really cold and can't stand it, I think it's okay to not force everyone to be outside and miserable. It's much better, in my opinion, for everyone to enjoy the outdoor environment and have a positive relationship to the outdoor environment, rather than making everyone miserable because you are miserable yourself, because emotions are catching. And I think it is something important to think about. That doesn't mean that you don't go outside because you don't like the weather. And it doesn't mean that you stand there not doing anything, shivering in the corner, because as we've already discussed, this is something that adults need to work on themselves. But it does mean that you can be aware, you can say things out loud, you can say, I'm cold and that's not making me feel too great, but I know that when I go inside, I'm going to have a warm drink and I'm going to have, I can snuggle up with a blanket, and this isn't going to last forever. And I think that's a really important skill, because life is not full of sunshine all of the time. It just isn't. And we need to teach children that we need to make the best of what we've got, and that anything that makes us miserable is not going to be there forever, and that it's something we can pass through. So I think it's really important that we expose ourselves to that, and also kind of coach the approach that we want to, that's a great saying, isn't it? Coach the approach that we want to reinforce. I think it's interesting that so many of us are not particularly outdoorsy, and I wonder why it is a problem that adults in all manner of countries and cultures find it difficult to engage in outdoor play with children, and that we become these people who just watch. And I think that's because we are in an environment where we're taught to think about the negative, and our brains are built to think of negative things because we need to keep ourselves safe. And if we don't think about the negative, then we don't think about the what if might happen. What if they fall over and break their foot? What if they jump and they hurt themselves? What if all of these things? And these things are important to think about, but we need to make sure that they don't overtake the benefits and our role as early years practitioners and early years educators. So there are risks to being outdoors, but there are also risks to being indoors. So we just need to mitigate any risks or negative effects that there might be. Things like staying within our ratios and providing a carefully thought out environment. We're not going to put babies in an area where all the bikes and scooters are, because that's not a very well thought out environment. That is dangerous. But there's no reason why we can't have bikes and cars out where there are also babies in the environment. We should think about a risk benefit approach, where we think about the risks but also the benefits alongside. And if the benefits outweigh the risks and the risks aren't too dangerous, then we should carry on with the activity. And there is loads of information out there and templates and all sorts about how to carry out a risk benefit approach. And that is also something that you should look at with your insurance, and that's all your kind of business, but it's worth looking into if you are worried about outdoors play. Knowing your children is really important for mitigating any risk. Who is likely to jump from the top of a climbing frame? Who is likely to get up a tree and not be able to get back down again? Who is likely to put that gravel in their mouth? And thinking about the needs and the development of your children and what they're likely to do means that you can plan activities that are appropriate for them. But we can also do other things, such as teaching children about safety checks. So as childminders, we often go out into the real world. Our environment is not it's not stationary and kind of like one thing all of the time. So yes, people might have a garden and it should be enclosed, and everybody should be checking them anyway. You check for intruders, you check for animal feces, you check for rubbish that's blown in or been thrown over the fence, all of these kind of things. And it would be the same in nurseries, that you have to carry out these checks. But in the most part, these areas are going to be pretty safe. You're not going to have anyone that's vandalised play park equipment. For example, your climbing frame at a nursery is less likely to be vandalised overnight than something in a play park. So it's definitely worth teaching the children about these safety checks and the places that we visit and what we're doing. So we're looking for glass, we're looking for dog poo together, and you get them to report to you about anything before they play in the area. So they, older children can really help with this. We can also teach older children that everyone has a right to play in all the spaces, so they can be aware of non-mobile children, for example, when they're riding bikes, so that they keep them safe. And we also don't want it to be stressful. So as children get older, they can take responsibility for that. And I promise you that if you do teach them this from very early on, they get it. I work with a non-mobile child who is coming up to 5 years now, 5 years old. And everyone is really aware of how much space that child takes up on the floor, how they have a right to play to, and how to keep them safe. And I'm so proud of all the children I've looked after that can, understand a fundamental right of that child's need to play and their need to be safe. So it really is possible. You just have to teach it and role model it and think about it out loud, and just be really respectful that everyone deserves a chance to play and to have space. And it kind of takes the pressure off you that you're not constantly hovering around the child on the floor, because the children will keep it in mind. And of course you need to watch. I'm never going to just 100% trust children, because they do get distracted more easily and accidents do happen. But it really does take a lot of stress off if the children are aware from day one that you have to keep the bikes away from a child that is on the floor. You also should role model, remind of things that we don't eat, such as we don't eat plants that we don't know about. We should always ask a grown-up about those plants. And we always narrate about road safety when we're crossing a road. We talk about looking left and right again. We talk about using our ears. We talk about checking while we're still walking. And I feel like childminders are really, really in a strong position for this, because we are a setting that goes out and into the wild and talks to people and discovers having to cross roads with small children. And I think that's something that is a real strength of ours, and that we should really utilise it. And these are ways to mitigate the risk. We're not just going to let children run off into a road. That's not what we do. And of course, that's going to be immensely dangerous. So we are naturally very good at teaching about these safety things. And I think it's really important to remember that, and to try and provide opportunities to access those risks, but with the correct kind of role modelling and teaching alongside it. With all of this in mind, how do we provide an outdoor environment, and should my garden look like a nursery? I think that of everything we've spoken about, it demonstrates the answer is no. We don't need an environment to look like a play park or a stereotypical nursery. A real garden that encourages growing, watching, moving around in different ways is great and is exactly what is needed. If you childmind from a flat like I have previously, then childminders have the additional strength of going out into local areas with young children, because we have to go out every day. And if you don't have access to a dedicated outdoor space, it really makes you go out and about more. So I think that's a real positive, and I think it's something that in kind of initial interviews with parents, if you do live in a flat without a garden, that it's something that you really explain to them, that actually not having a garden makes you go outside more into the real world. So I think it's a real pro, and I can talk from experience that it is a challenge, but it's totally doable. And I found that I went out a lot more than many other childminders in my local area, and I was always out and about and really well known. So I think it is a real plus. So don't panic if you don't have a garden and you're hearing about all of this. I think you don't have to have mud kitchens, climbing frames, swing sets if it doesn't fit your home and your family. Of course, if you have these things in your garden, great, and you're providing loads of opportunities. I'm not saying it's bad at all. I'm saying that people need to think about what's best for their home and their family and their setting, and go from there. There are so many ways to provide everything that's necessary for the outdoors kind of activities and development, and you get to choose what works for your setting. In general, we're self-employed and we get to choose our approach, and I think that's amazing. And lots of people are very jealous that I get to spend loads of time outside in my work, especially in those kind of spring, summer, autumn months. And ultimately, it's what works for you. I've spent years dedicating my life to my work. My home has looked completely like it's just for children for years. And when I moved in to my new setting, and I've moved into my new home with a partner, that kind of doesn't work like that anymore. And I have to work out what's best for my kind of home life and my family life. And having a garden that's completely looking like it's for children, especially when we don't have our own children, that's not really appropriate for my setting anymore. So I've had to really adapt it, and I think that's okay. And I do believe that I provide everything a child needs to be outdoors. We do play with mud and sand and water and all of these things, but my environment is now much more like a pack away setting than it used to be. And I definitely 100% feel like I do provide everything needed for outdoor environment, and I'm sure you do too, but I think we can all agree that we can probably all do better, and particularly with ourselves not becoming someone who just supervises children. And I think that's where the key is to what all of the approaches are saying. It's not necessarily about the resources or the environment itself. It's about the opportunities the children are provided with for when they're outdoors, and the interactions and role modelling that they get. And I think that's really important to keep in mind anytime we're talking about outdoor play with children. We've talked about the negative and how to mitigate the negative. But I think that childminders, as always, I believe that childminders have such particular strengths, and of course there are some challenges that childminders face that are different, I feel, to other settings. But we're going to look at things specifically relating to outdoor play. So I feel strength that we can access a range of places that is more than just our garden. Maybe the play park, a country park, a beach, a forest, a farm, playing fields, all this kind of stuff. It all provides children with access to changes in sizes, space, and of atmosphere. They all provide different sensory experiences, different natural elements, various landscapes, as well as giving multiple opportunities of learning in different areas. And it's vastly different to every day in the garden with familiar toys. And I think there that the strength really lies in the variety that we can provide. Even in a really small suburb or village, I think there are lots of different types of outdoor environments that you can go to, and it's the variety that is key, because in the variety you're giving a variety of different sensory exploration, you're giving a variety of different vocabulary because there'll be different wildlife or different objects, and you're giving different social opportunities because different kinds of people are likely to be walking through the forest as they are through a green space in the kind of local village. So having these different experiences is what builds the brain up. Experiencing all these different things and repeating that is really, really important. And I think it's something that as childminders, we really, really, really have a strength at. Because if a child goes to a group setting, such as a nursery or school, they might get the occasional outing. And I'm sure there are nurseries out there that are leading the way with this. But in the most part, in most nurseries that I have worked in, or that children I have cared for in joint kind of practice with nurseries, their outdoor environment is their garden. And that's it. And that's all they go to that whole time. And a big strength of mine and a big bit of feedback from my families I've worked with has always been that they've gone to all these different places. So go us. We also have a great amount of control over our outdoor spaces as childminders, even those who rent property. And this is because we can choose to create areas for children to grow things, even if it's just in pots. We can choose to make the environment kind of inviting and comfortable. And when I say that, I mean for us. Selfish, isn't it? But if we are invited into our own garden and we're comfortable to be there, then that means we are more likely to be engaged in outdoor practice. If you imagine yourself in your outdoor space and you've got seating that you like to sit on, and you've got plants that you love, which attract beautiful butterflies and bees and other creatures, and you can smell smells that you like, and it's just visually appealing to you. Are you going to want to be there more than if your garden was completely concrete with a hopscotch drawn on it and climbing frame for the children, and you've got nowhere to be comfortable? Where are you going to choose to want to be with the children in each case? I think I would want to choose to be in the first environment that I've made nice for me and my charges, rather than being in an environment that I don't enjoy and it's not going to make me want to go out there and it's not going to make me want to engage. I'm only going out there because I have to. And you can hear just in my kind of voice about the two differences of outdoor space, which one I want to be in. I want to be in the one that makes me engage to read with the children and be comfortable and have fun and just enjoy it. I do not want to be in the one that's boring and I have nothing to do and I'm just standing there and I'm cold and I'm bored. And I think that because we as childminders get the control over that, we don't have to ask a manager for anything. We don't have to say to a manager, please can I have some pots to grow things with the children, and them say no, or them say there's nothing in the budget for that, or anything. We get to choose. You say, I think the children would benefit from growing carrots this year. I'm going to buy these really deep pots and some carrot seeds. Boom. You get to choose it. You get to choose if you leave a long patch of grass that children get to swish through, and you don't have to make choices based on other people's policies, because quite honestly, unless you are the owner and the founder and the manager of a nursery, you're not making choices based on what you want to do with children and what's best for those children. Yes, nurseries can provide what's best for children, but you are not making that choice as an individual because you're having to follow policies given to you by the creators or the founders or whoever is right up there. They are making the policies, not you. And when you're a childminder, a huge strength is that you get to choose what your environment is like. You get to change it when you've got a child who this environment is not working for right now. And that is huge for the outdoors. Make it a place. Even if you're in a rented property, you can choose things that are removable. You can do nature things. You can plant seeds. You can get mini beasts in the garden. You don't have to do anything permanent to the garden to create that environment. So that got a bit passionate, but we can make those choices. And also looking at us again, because actually I do really think it's about us and not the children, which sounds really like self-centered, but we can choose to be interested in the natural world, and we can choose to learn about it. Not everyone calls themselves outdoorsy, but you might like to watch the birds. Well, when you're outdoors, you can point them out and you can learn the names of the birds that visit your garden. I'm not saying like Steve and Bert and Florence. I'm talking about blue tits, crows, jackdaws, goldfinches, whatever birds visit your garden, you can learn the names. And if you're not sure, internet is going to be your best friend for that. You're going to have loads of books that you can borrow from the library about bird watching. Just all you have to do is point them out and enjoy them. Maybe you love seeing butterflies, so you could listen to a podcast about them and stimulate your interest in them. Maybe you enjoy spotting flowers when you're out and about. And so is there a way that you could download an app on your phone that helps you identify them? So then when you're on the school run, maybe you can learn together with the children about what the flower's called. We get to choose our own self-development focus that impacts the children. And that's why it's not selfish to be thinking about ourselves, because what we do to ourselves impacts the children. If I learn more about flowers and I'm interested in flowers, I'm naturally going to be telling the children about the flowers, and then they're going to be more interested in the flowers. We don't have to wait for a yearly review from an employer that might focus on things that are really not relevant to the education we provide, because we can look at ourselves, we can think we want to be a bit more outdoorsy and just go and do it. We don't need to wait for the end of the year appraisal from a manager who might be talking about that we've had a few sick days this year. And it's not really very much to do with the education we provide, or maybe we're not tidy enough, or maybe we're not doing the laundry rota as much as other people. Like, we get to choose what we get to reflect of ourselves and what we're going to learn and be stimulated in. And those things are going to be what impacts the children. If we are interested in and passionate about outdoors, how is that not going to get projected onto the children and encourage them to be outdoorsy too? So that's my thought on that. And I feel like these are things that childminders are going to be really, really, really strong at. And I think we should just shout it from the rooftops, because oh, what an amazing gift it is that we can give children the chance to be outdoorsy, which is going to impact them for the rest of their lives. They're going to want to be outdoors in the fresh air. They're going to be wanting to walk everywhere or cycle, and they're going to want to be interested in the environment that needs them so much. And they're going to be interested in protecting wildlife because they know what the wildlife is. Like, what a gift we're giving them. Seriously, like, why are we not shouting about this more? Of course, climbing is important, but we're not just taking them to play parks every day and watching them climb. Like, that's not what we're doing when we're talking about outdoors. And I feel really passionately about it. And although I'm not a forest school setting and I'm not an outdoors only setting, we spend a lot of time outdoors just enjoying it and being grateful that we're safe outdoors. Like, we're not going outdoors with children and wondering if, something awful is going to happen kind of on a daily basis. We are exceptionally lucky. And I think we need to reflect that in our practice and show the world and in the society that by childminders being more outdoorsy, we are giving children just so much. And I really hope that you agree with that. I feel like we're getting to a point now where I've talked about all these points, and now hopefully I can kind of squish them together like a ball of Play-Doh, and that it will all start making sense. So in my head, I make lots of lists. I am a list lover. And one of my very varied lists is outdoors. And in my head, there are lists of things that are great to provide all children, no matter their age or stage of development. And these things can happen weekly. So from my experience and the research from, for the podcast episode today, getting fresh air and experiencing the weather doesn't matter what weather, does it? We need to experience rain. We need to experience sun. We need to experience hot, cold, snowing, raining, sleeting, hailing. We need to just go out there every week and experience the weather. We need opportunities to move our own bodies, whether that's crawling, walking, cruising, skipping, hopping, climbing, dancing, swishing through grass, kicking our legs, tummy time, just opportunities to move your own body. Natural light and areas of shade. Being around real grass and plants. And I have a friend who works for the Wildlife Trust, and we had a huge long text message conversation about how artificial grass is really popular. And I am sure there are loads of you out there that have artificial grass. And that's fine if that's the choice that works for you and your families. But we need to be aware of the kind of impacts that has, both for the children we look after, for us, and for the environment and the natural world. And artificial grass is not friendly to the world. It's made of plastic to begin with, but also it doesn't provide anything towards the ecosystem for creatures. And yes, it's great not having muddy patches in the winter and things. It also gets really, really hot, so you need to be careful of that in the summer if you do have artificial grass. But we need to give children opportunities to be around real grass and plants. So if your garden is all artificial grass and that's the way you want it, fine. You could grow grass in real tubs, but also you can take your children out to real grass. You can go to a meadow, you can go to a wildlife trust or a national trust or a country park or whatever. Anywhere that's real grass and plants, they need to be around them. And so again, you can make your choice about your setting, but you can also make the choice about the experiences you're offering. And for me, providing that every week is really important. Sensory opportunities. So that can be anything from smelling flowers and herbs, listening to something, feeling a natural texture, just something sensory every week for every child. If you've only got a child that attends one day a week, you need to make sure they're getting that opportunity. Noticing something related to wildlife. So I always try and point something out at least once a week. That could be birds, bugs, mammals, small mammals like mice and shrews, nests that you've seen in a tree, anything that you see that's something related to wildlife, just name it, just point it out and name it and be curious about it. Handling natural objects and resources, maybe that's them picking up sticks on the walk, stones, shells, mud, sand, water. All of these things provide great sensory feedback for our brains. Be a little freedom to do things that aren't directed by me as the adult and that have an element of risk. So I always try to make sure that there is time for children to have freedom outdoors, that they're not entirely directed by me the whole time, and find something to be curious about, and adults thinking and wondering it out loud, observing that children find something interesting and go with it. It could be something like watching ducks at the duck pond. It could be something like this teeny tiny little stone they found. It could even be something really bizarre like oh, I tell you what has been of interest at the moment. There's been this tiny little peg fairy that was hung on a bush on one of our regular walks. And sometimes the fairy is there and sometimes it's not. And that's been so interesting and has sparked all kinds of conversation about where the fairy might have gone and why they might have gone, especially with the cold weather. So the children have been talking about how the weather might be why the fairy isn't there today. Maybe they've gone on holiday because it's too wet and windy. So being curious about things, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a natural thing. It could be something that is in your outdoor environment, like diggers, people working, buildings that look particularly interesting, something that's broken, that can also be really interesting. So just finding things to be curious about outdoors. So when I concentrate on that little list and thinking about something on that list every week, that all of those things are provided for, I find that it just all looks after itself. When I concentrate on it, I don't have to give everything my full attention, if that makes sense. So because I'm doing those things, children are getting exercise. Because I'm doing those things, they are at less risk of being unfit or developing conditions that are related to being unfit or unhealthy. They are making their heart strong. They are gaining bone density because of their healthy kind of activity levels. They are getting their 3 hours of active play. They're getting to engage socially because of all of those things. They are getting to engage in risky play because of these things. And they get to make connections just by being out in the wild. So I feel like you focus on what you provide for pure living and joy rather than things that they have to know. And the things that they have to know will just come. If you focus on them loving being outdoors, then the things they have to know will come. If you focus on having joy of moving your body, then the fitness will come. Like, you don't need to force a fitness, for example. So that's my opinion, that's my list. And these are all things that babies can experience too. Babies can smell herbs. You can walk past a rosemary bush and brush it on your hands and then hold your hands near the baby's face and they can smell it. They can be around real grass and touch it and watch it blowing in the wind. They can get fresh air by being in the buggy and experience the weather. You know, you don't have to constantly wrap them in a rain cover all the time. If it's just a tiny little bit wet, they can feel that. They can experience natural light, which is good for their vision, as well as being in areas of shade to protect their skin and cool down. They can watch animals. Like, the babies can do all of these things, and hopefully in the future we'll have more research to back up why that's important for babies. But I think that ultimately, because you're focusing on living and joy and curiosity and finding things out, then everything they have to know is just going to happen. And I feel like if we are enjoying being outside, then the children are going to enjoy being outside. If we are just a little bit more outdoorsy, they are going to be a little bit more outdoorsy. And what a gift that is. If only someone had given me that gift when I was small. If someone had given me the gift to be, more physical and being outdoors when things were hard and knowing that I could do hard things, that would have been such a gift. And I really hope that by listening today, I've given you a little bit of that gift, and that is also going to impact the children that you care for. And I hope that we've managed to squish together all the pieces that we've talked about, and that it has encouraged you to do a little bit of your own research, whether that's finding out more about children being outdoors, or about health benefits to children from being outdoors, or whether that's finding out birds' names and flowers' names and places you can take the children that are local to you. Whatever your own research is, I hope you enjoy it, and I hope that you will join me again next time for the next episode of Mind That Childminder. And until then, take care, get outdoors just a little bit more, and I will see you soon. Bye! Mind That Childminder. Find us on Facebook, X and Instagram for more about upcoming episodes. All topics discussed are intended for entertainment and educational purposes. This podcast is not intended to give any legal advice and is purely an opinion and supportive piece.